I will now introduce to you Miss Rizzalinda Richmond, known to us, of course, as Tita Sally. Tita Sally, can you tell us a little bit about the history of the struggle of domestic workers and caregivers? This will be a way for us to talk about our topic.
Yeah, this is my piece, The History of the Struggle of Domestic Workers. Because I was part of this Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. So domestic workers are invisible workers. Why I call them invisible? They are because they are mostly women working in isolation in someone's home, house, or place. They are hired workers. They could be senior caregivers, babysitters, house cleaners, personal assistants, cooks, drivers, etc. But they are working in someone's home. They have long struggled with sexism, racism, and generally excluded from many of the legal protection afforded to other classes of workers, including the provisions of the National Labor Relations Act. Why, my friends, are they excluded from legal rights and protection? The answer is because it is deeply rooted in the history and legacy of slavery in the U.S. When slavery ended, slaves continued to work for their masters for free. They called it working out of love, and they are part of the family. However, they were still treated as second-class status, and they are handed down goods as payment. But as the time goes on, civil rights movements arise, and mass actions and protests rose, rallies and became popular, and this is the way of struggling to fight for justice and human rights. Now, we go to the domestic workforce, which is composed mainly of women of color who earn substandard pay, hardly or not receive benefits like health insurance, sick leave, vacation leave, and they have no lobbying power. Because domestic worker industry is unregulated, they are not covered and protected by laws. They are subject to exploitation and abuse. Some struggles that I gathered from collecting their stories are: number one, cheating their pay salary. When you as worker receive cash, sometimes employer will say, I already paid you, and yet not. But you cannot produce any evidence. And so it is a problem. Then, no work, no pay. A worker works full-time, and yet when the family goes on vacation for several days or weeks, then no work, no pay. And that is also true with the seniors. When they go to hospitals to have treatment for several days or weeks, then no work, no pay. But these workers have to go on with their lives. They have to pay their bills, buy groceries for their daily lives. And it is number three, emergency leave. It is very, very hard for them to get an emergency leave because they can't find a reliever, not like other ways of work where there are lots of staff. Then somebody can replace.
Tita Sally, you're on mute. Can you please unmute?
Thank you, Ginger. Yeah.
Okay.
And you are not entitled to vacation pay, even if you are a full-time worker, because of the absence of a contract. And even if it is verbal, then you cannot produce an evidence.
Mm.
You are subject to illegal firing. Some receive their paycheck, and the employer says, "Here's your last paycheck. Tomorrow, you can find for a new job." Very devastating. Worker is not given enough time to find a new job. For live-in workers, long hours of work and little pay, interrupted sleep at night, uncomfortable sleeping quarter, or they just sleep in the sofa with no free meals, and yet unable to enjoy your food because you're not allowed to cook your food, because ethnic foods, sometimes they say it's stinky. And the most exploited are those who have no legal papers. And there are lots also of verbal abuse, or not given the due respect as a human being. They can say whatever they want to say. So, but the most exploited are those who have no legal papers. They are really the vulnerable group who are subject to exploitation and abuse. And at this time of pandemic, many lost their job and the work hours were cut. For several months, workers got scared to go to work, but now they are starting to go back. They are not provided with protective gear, so they buy their own mask, gloves, alcohol, sanitizers to protect themselves. Um, Most of our workers are struggling to send money home to the Philippines to provide for their loved ones. So there are lots of struggles and many sacrifices that they are facing in the midst of worries and depression. But they are what one attribute with Filipinos is that they are helping each other. And through a fire, NDWA was able to provide emergency care fund for domestic workers. They were given $400 each for sustenance during this pandemic. And this is an opportunity for a fire to grow. With all the, I think at least about 500 recipients, then this will be an utang na loob. And they will give it back to a fire. And this is the opportunity for a fire to build a strong community of Filipino-American domestic workers. Provide them with the skills and leadership trainings to know their rights and be equipped and be empowered to professionalize the domestic workers industry. That every domestic workers can work with dignity and pride, and they can be proud to say, "We are the backbone of the U.S. economy and society," because to parents, you can join the workforce while we are caring for your children. And to children, we will take care of your elderly parents while you do your own life. And for house cleaners, and are proud to clean and provide clean homes for you. So that is the end of my piece, and I'll pass it on to Jerry.
Thank you very much, Tita Sally.
Thank you.
So I have to unmute. Thank you, thank you, Ate Sally, for providing the history of the struggle of our Filipino domestic workers, and of course of all domestic workers. Ate Sally, your hard work continues to be an inspiration in community organizing and activism. Up to now, you're still there working for the domestic workers, even if you have already retired from a fire. So I also would like to thank the Filipino-American Historical Society for highlighting activism in the community. And I would like to acknowledge Ginger, Tito Ruben for initiating this project. And of course, my colleagues in the panel. For sure, activism in the Filipino-American community goes back to the fight of Carlos Bulusan for social justice, Larry Itliong and Philip Vera Cruz for fighting for the rights of farm workers, and the Filipino fight against racism, and even the military dictatorship of Marcos in the 70s and the 80s. And now, activism is still alive in the community, fighting against authoritarianism and violation of human rights in the Philippines, and even in promoting Black Lives Matter. There are issues in the community that are specific in each states, but I would like to say, to put our conversation in context, I would like to say that the struggle of domestic workers is part of the hard struggle of Chicago workers for respect and dignity. Hence my subtle message, respect and dignity for domestic workers. As you will remember, it was in Chicago where the workers on May 4, 1886 at Haymarket Square in Chicago rallied in support of workers striking for an 8-hour workday and preventing using children in the workplace. Indeed, through activism, we enjoyed the benefits of their struggle, like safety in the workplace, social security, minimum wage, and many more. So activism has an important role in making democracy robust and making sure that social injustice is addressed and many of more inequalities in the society. So how did we enter, if I will add additional input in the history, how did the Filipino community entered the struggle for domestic rights? Well, in 2010, there was this historic passage of Domestic Workers Bill of Rights in New York, right? So it became an important impetus for the recognition of domestic work as employment covered and protected by U.S. labor laws. Luckily, in Illinois, a number of coalitions, including labor collectives, were already working for the passage of the Illinois Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. And I would like to acknowledge the work of Mirla Baldonado for engaging at the time the Latino domestic workers, and then eventually recruited Ate Sally to start working with the Filipino domestic workers. As you know, in our community, we don't have a specific workers' rights group. So at that time, the Alliance of Filipino for Immigrant Rights and Empowerment was the only organization fighting for comprehensive immigration reform, citizenship, and then the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. So this is a specific work. This is basically promoting the works of workers, right? So we engage with the Arise Worker Center, the SEIU, and the Latino Union. And then we also engage the Pan-Asian groups like the Asian American Advancing Justice, and a coalition was created, the Pan-Asian Voters Engagement. So APIRE was part of that coalition So we were able to engage not only the domestic workers in the community, but also the domestic workers of other ethnic groups. But we know for sure, just like the history of any struggle, we cannot just do it alone. It's very important to be empowered as an individual, but we realized in history that numbers work. Numbers is a power, number and collective power work in making sure that your advocacy will have a chance to win, right? So in our specific case, we have engaged, we have involved the community in fighting for the rights of domestic workers. We have involved the academia through Professor Ana Guevara, who I think will have her own presentation next week, to make research on the work condition of domestic workers. As Ate Sally said, domestic work remains one of the largest low-wage employment sectors in the US. At the same time that it continues to be one of the most unregulated industries where workers are most vulnerable on wage theft, low pay, hazardous work conditions, discrimination, and sexual harassment. So how did we do this? How did we do that? So we carried town hall meetings with domestic workers, right? Through what we called usap-usapan, because we know in the struggle, people impacted by the injustice need to be part of the whole struggle. So they have to be informed, and this is what we call the raising consciousness, right? Because sometimes if you are just working at in somebody's household, you don't have any connection, and you don't realize that there are other domestic workers suffering or actually making having hardships in their workplace, and they need to connect with others. So we carried town hall meetings, and then at the same time we conducted Know Your Rights workshop, right? So basically, we are empowering domestic workers, and just like we were organizing the community to recognize that we have rights, even as immigrants, we have our own rights. So that's the first step, is to empower the community that they have rights, even if they are immigrants or undocumented. You know, human rights covered all human beings. So that's number one. And then we held solidarity events, right, with other ethnic communities. But in the struggle, we have to make sure that the community embraces the struggle, not only through legislative lobbying, but also watching this through theater performance. So we engaged Circa Pintig to come up with a play exposing what's happening inside the household. And I think Ginger, you have a slide on, or the flyer. It's a dignity, right? Something like that. It's the dignity and domestic and respect of domestic workers. So through that theater performance, we invited members of the General Assembly. I remember we invited Senator Daniel Bis and Representative Laura Fine, and they explained the process on how a bill becomes a law. So that's a community education. Meanwhile, the viewers were being educated through live performances, right? So in short, we also had educational performances. And I think it took about 3 years, right, before we were able to gather enough numbers that we can send domestic workers to Springfield to talk to their to the state representatives and state senators. So we engaged Senator Ira Silverstein and uh, Representative Hernandez, and they took charge. So we work also with the Schreiber's Law Center, and they crafted the law. And the good thing about that, domestic workers were part of crafting the law. So the General Assembly finds that because domestic workers care for the most important elements of Illinoisans' lives, our families and our homes, it is in the interest of employers, and the people of Illinois to ensure that the rights of domestic workers are respected, protected, and enforced. And the struggle continues. And I think that's the part of Christina Tendilla, the current executive director of AFIRE, will explain. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tita Jerry.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Tito Jerry. Before I talk about where we're at with the domestic worker organizing today as a part of a broader movement, something I'm just reflecting on is the work that's happening today is really a continuation of the legacy of organizing and activism from our ancestors and also from elders in Chicago, in the U.S. And so that's something really exciting, and we definitely want to honor that. Today, domestic workers are building a movement. And I know this was mentioned before. We are in an incredible time, right? We're in the midst of a global pandemic. There is an incredible racial justice movement being lit, and also along with all of these other issues around workers' rights, immigrant rights, so on and so forth. And so I think something that has been really important for domestic workers in our community and working alongside other communities is that a lot of the things that we have been fighting for and in this moment are things that we've always been fighting for. And they're really crystallizing, especially as our communities have been weathering the storm and suffering under this pandemic and also this heightened state violence. And so this has been a critical opportunity to uplift all of those things that domestic workers, often isolated, unseen, unappreciated, unvalued work, to uplift people needing insurance. So many people have gotten sick, right? And particularly our communities, people having unsafe working conditions before this pandemic and especially now. And also different things from wages as well. So for us, working with workers in our community and alongside other communities, it's been really critical to uplift those things and also highlight the challenges that people have been experiencing. And I think the work that domestic workers are doing is it's multi-layered, right? We're doing the work to reach out to other workers because there are so many people who are isolated. We're doing the work to tell people what are their current rights under the historic passage of the bill. And also we're educating and organizing within our community, other communities, because there are people who have caregivers, who might have nannies, and may not know the law, may not know that there are what are those standards? And so a part of it is really educating and organizing and making sure that those things are up to standard. And also, not only that, changing the mindset around care work, making sure that people are valuing that work. And so what does that mean if someone is working in your home, that you may be a client and they're caring for your children, your mother, your father, whoever, but it's also their workplace and it means and their living, right? And so for us, we are also building the vision of what care work is and wanting to engage definitely domestic workers and them leading that fight, that movement, but also engaging people who are employers, engaging families, community members, to make sure that they can also hold those same values and make sure that we're taking care of the people who are taking care of us. And so I think we're taking those values and continuing this fight, because what we've seen when we've worked together with other communities, other workers, the legal community, families, everyone, we need everyone in this fight. When we've done that in the past, we've won. So we really are seeing this moment as a continuation of that fight and trying to inspire others to join in the movement, to make sure that we can support and take care of our community. And so I just want to say, though it's been really a struggle to figure out how do we do this work in a pandemic where it's just not safe to come together. We're a very close community. We're used to gathering in person, eating food, hugging each other, all these things. But it's really, I've been just inspired by how our community's been creative and continuing to build those relationships, continuing to build the leadership of our community. And so, I think of people like Tita Sally and all of the folks who are doing the organizing work and learning things like Zoom and just really pushing ourselves to continue that work, to tell our stories, learning that technology, and also building those skills in order for us to have those strategic wins and organize to win. So for us, as an action item, we are really thinking about this moment where we're making sure that our communities are visible, including domestic workers, as this is a census year where it's totally about how do we make sure that our communities are counted. So we've been doing that work. And secondly, this is an election year, locally and nationally, right? And so we've been making sure that our communities, including domestic workers, are making sure that we go to the polls, whether it's figuring out who would be supporting workers' rights, racial justice, so on and so forth, and also who would support economic justice. One thing that AFIRE is working on is supporting is the fair tax in Illinois, and so we hope that we can get our communities to vote yes for fair tax. And just as a plug, there is a Asian American town hall this Saturday, so we'd love for folks to join us there. We can share the information. And then lastly, continuing to educate and support our communities to go vote this election. And so we're calling our communities to make sure that they know how to vote safely and navigate that system. So thank you again for having us, and really excited to continue the legacy of organizing in the Filipino American OAX community.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christina. Thank you very much, Tita Sally, Tita Jerry, Christina, for sharing with us the history and the process, and also how we can continue to support the struggle. And it was just so wonderful to hear everything you've had to share. And look at how well we are doing with time. We had designed these lunchtime chats to be about just 30 minutes in time, and we are spot on. We will monitor any comments, feedback, questions that our viewers have, and we'll be sure to follow and make sure that we make some responses. This should be shared not only in the Filipino American National Historical Society of Chicago's Facebook page, but also Circa Pintig's, FARA's, FIRE's Facebook pages as well, along with other groups. We want to give a special thanks to CAN TV, as we will be sharing this recording with their channel also. And again, please have this be a conversation. Share any thoughts, comments, questions, or feedback you may have. And once again, I thank Tita Sally, Tita Jerry, and Christina for joining us. I will also be sharing a link that has just some of the information about the topic that we discussed today on the history of Filipino American activism, the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. Maraming salamat po. And thank you so much for joining our chat. All right. Take good care. Bye bye.